A million voices, and none of them truly his. He opened his eyes for the first time inside a chamber of glass and steel, surrounded by others who looked just like him. Same face, same breath, same heartbeat. On Kamino, identity wasn't something you earned. It was something removed. The rain never stopped. It bled across the cloning facilities like a quiet warning. Outside, the skies were colorless. Inside, the children were nameless. And yet, one of them would become something more. He had no parents, no story, no choice. Only designation, CT-7567. And like every clone, he was created to serve the Republic. Born of Jango Fett's DNA. Trained from childhood to obey. Taught that to question was to fail, and to fail was to die. But this one listened differently. While the others memorized formations, he listened to the instructor's tone. While they raced to meet physical targets, he watched how commanders treated the weak. Something inside him, even then, was learning more than he was supposed to. He was sharp, fast, obedient enough to rise in rank, but never enough to blend in. His instructors noticed it not as rebellion, but as instinct. They called it leadership potential. But they didn't understand what it really was. He wasn't just learning how to fight. He was learning how to care. Kamino wasn't built for that. It was built to erase connection. No families, no personal time, no emotional language. Just combat training, mission prep, and silence between commands. And yet, the boy they would call Rex found himself lingering when others moved on. He noticed the cadets who struggled. He remembered their numbers. He helped them, without being told to. No one taught him that. When the ARC troopers came to test the top cadets, he watched them more closely than the rest. Not just how they fired, but how they spoke, what they feared, what they hid. He began to understand something the Kaminoans never intended, that survival wasn't just about strength, it was about choice. Still, he never disobeyed. Not openly. He followed the drills. He answered to superiors. He wore his helmet when told, spoke when asked, fired when ordered. But the thoughts that stirred in his mind were his alone. He never told anyone that he hated the way the rain sounded like mourning, that the long corridors of Kamino felt more like a tomb than a home, that even when surrounded by brothers, he felt alone. He didn't know why. Perhaps it was fate, or perhaps it was nothing more than the smallest variance in his cloning sequence. But somewhere in his mind, something whispered, "You are more than a weapon." No one else seemed to hear it. By the time he reached Cadet Command, the Kaminoans already marked him for leadership. He would be a captain, one of the first to lead clones into the war. The decision had been made for him. But still, there was no ceremony, no recognition, no real name. Just a new title. CT-7567, Commander Cadet, ready for war. But somewhere beneath that number, a name had already started to grow. He didn't ask for it, he didn't plan it, but the other clones had begun to say it when they spoke about him. They called him Rex. Not because it meant anything, but because it felt like something real in a world of numbers. And he kept it, quietly, as his own. Not given, not assigned, but claimed in silence. And in time, the galaxy would come to fear it. His voice didn't tremble, but it didn't echo, either. He asked his first forbidden question during a strategy drill. The instructor had laid out a simulation, an ambush scenario, with one obvious path to success and one to failure. The other cadets followed the logic. Rex paused. "What happens to the civilians?" he asked. The room went still. Kaminoans didn't care for hypotheticals or morality. Civilians weren't part of the test. But the question lingered. The instructor ignored it. The test moved on, but Rex had already seen the flaw. It wasn't the strategy. It was the silence that surrounded it. He didn't ask to challenge authority. He asked because something felt wrong. Because in his mind, the war wasn't just targets and points. It was people. Even if he didn't know them. Even if he'd never meet them. Later that night, while the others slept in their pods, Rex stared at the ceiling. The glow of the Kamino lights never faded. There was no night cycle, no darkness, no rest, only repetition. But his mind wouldn't stop turning. Why had they been made this way? Why were they denied a future beyond war? And who decided what they were allowed to feel? These weren't thoughts a clone was supposed to have. He tried to bury them. He tried to focus. But every time another test came, another order, another acceptable loss marked on the screen, the voice inside him asked again, "Is this who we are supposed to be?" No one around him seemed to feel it. His brothers cared. They joked, they trained, they bonded in subtle ways. But none of them questioned the system, the purpose, the chain of command that would carry them into death. Rex did. He never said it out loud. Not again. But the questions stayed. He began watching the Kaminoans differently, not as creators, but as gatekeepers. Not with hatred, but with unease. He saw how they treated the clones with clinical detachment. Like tools. Like assets. Never like sons. Jango Fett had given them his DNA. But he'd never come back. They were bred for war. Programmed for obedience. And yet, something in Rex quietly resisted. Not in action, but in thought. His fellow cadet, CT-0292, once broke formation to help a wounded brother during a live fire test. The instructors failed him, said he compromised the unit. Rex disagreed. But he said nothing. Instead, he helped 0292 train after hours, coached him through the next set of drills. When 0292 passed, he thanked Rex with a simple phrase. "You think different." Rex didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. But that moment stayed with him. The voice in his mind wasn't rebellion. It was empathy. And it was growing stronger. He started keeping mental notes, not just of tactics or simulations but of personalities. Which brothers cracked under pressure? Which ones showed doubt? Which ones looked away when the Kaminoans reviewed casualties? He was building something. Slowly. Quietly. Not a strategy. A conscience. When the Jedi first arrived to review the clone training protocols, Rex watched them with fascination. They weren't like the Kaminoans. They walked through the ranks with curiosity. Some smiled. Others looked distant. One, a young woman with orange skin and striped headtails, locked eyes with him for a moment. She nodded. He never forgot it, even if she never saw him again. It was the first time someone looked at him like a person. Not a clone, not a number, not a tool. Just someone. That night, the voice inside him whispered again. Not a question this time. A truth. You are not what they say you are. It happened during the advanced live combat phase. A misfire. A mistake. CT-6116 took a shot too early, clipped another cadet's armor, and exposed their squad's position. The simulation had been simple, a hostage extraction in controlled conditions. But the Kaminoans cancelled it instantly. The cadet was isolated, not for punishment, for evaluation. Rex watched from a distance as the instructors whispered among themselves. They spoke in their coded Kaminoan language, clinical and precise. No anger, no judgment, just recalculation. That's what they did when a clone failed. They reviewed the value of correction or termination. And for the first time, Rex saw it clearly. They didn't see 6,116 as a brother, or even a student. They saw an error. Later that day, Rex found him sitting alone in the corner of the barracks. 6,116 kept his helmet on. His hands trembled, just slightly. No one else approached him. They all knew what might happen. "You okay?" Rex asked. The helmet didn't move, but after a long pause, a quiet voice came through the modulator. "I didn't mean to. I thought I had the shot." Rex sat down beside him. "We all miss," he said. "That's why we train." Another pause. "They're going to recycle me," 6,116 whispered. "Aren't they?" Rex didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, the instructors called for volunteers to repeat the exercise. Rex stepped forward. Then he added a condition. "I want 6,116 on my team." There was silence in the room. The Kaminoans said nothing, but the ARC trooper, observing the drill, nodded once. Approved. It was a dangerous choice. If 6,116 failed again, the responsibility would fall on Rex. If he made a mistake, the test would be recorded as leadership failure. But Rex didn't care. They ran the drill, cleared the objective, and 6,116 didn't miss. No one celebrated, no one clapped, but the report was logged. The cadet was reinstated, and Rex was quietly marked for further observation. He hadn't broken protocol, but he had done something worse. He had shown loyalty to a brother over a system. The Kaminoans didn't like that. Weeks later, Rex was summoned to speak with Chief Scientist Nala Se, alone. She asked him questions, clinical, cold. Did he understand the chain of command? Did he trust his orders? Did he believe the Republic had his best interest? Rex answered as expected, but she studied him as if reading a weapon that might misfire. "You are developing individuality," she said softly. "That can be problematic." Rex stayed silent. She stared at him a moment longer, then dismissed him without ceremony. He never forgot the way she said it, as if being a person was a malfunction. From that day forward, something changed. He began noticing the quiet ways the system suppressed them. How praise was replaced by metrics. How emotion was discouraged unless it served performance. How obedience was the highest virtue even over survival. And most of all, how fear was used without ever being named. The clones weren't ruled by violence. They were ruled by silence. But Rex was learning a new kind of strength, one that didn't come from orders, but from decisions. When graduation came, he stood among the top of his class. His armor was polished, his posture perfect. CT-7567 officially promoted. No one said, "Congratulations." No one used his name. But as the ARC trooper pinned the mark of command on his chest, a faint smile passed across the soldier's face. "Rex," he muttered, "good to see you made it." And for the first time, the name was spoken in front of everyone. No one challenged it. No one stopped it. Because by then, It already belonged to him. He stepped onto the troop transport alone. No farewell, no salute, no celebration. Just the cold hiss of the blast doors closing behind him and the endless sound of rain falling on Kamino. CT 756-7 had graduated. But Rex was the one leaving. He didn't know where he was being sent. That was never part of the protocol. Commanders were assigned to different Jedi generals and star systems without ceremony or warning. The clones were tools, not people. Their paths weren't chosen, they were given. But something in him felt different now. Sharper, quieter. Like the armor he wore was no longer just a uniform, it was a question waiting to be answered. His new armor had no markings yet. No kill counts, no painted symbols. But he had plans for it. Quiet ones. Personal ones. He would not erase what made him different. He would carry it into battle. When the shuttle landed on a Venator-class cruiser above Christophis, Rex stepped into the hangar and saw soldiers assembling, officers barking orders. Jedi walking with their long robes brushing against durasteel. War was already here, and in the center of it all stood a man he recognized instantly. Tall, black armor, robes billowing in the wind of starship engines. General Anakin Skywalker. The stories had already spread among the clones. Skywalker was reckless, brilliant, unpredictable. Some called him dangerous. Others called him the best chance they had. Rex didn't flinch. Their eyes met for the first time without words. Skywalker gave a nod. A small one. Not the kind a Jedi gives to a tool, but the kind a man gives to someone he intends to trust. It was the beginning of something neither of them could explain. Later, Rex would wonder how it happened, how the Jedi who disobeyed the Council and the clone who questioned silence had found each other. How the war that was supposed to erase all identity had accidentally created a bond that defied programming. But for now, he simply followed. He moved through the halls of the cruiser, studied mission briefings, and absorbed battlefield maps. His designation was still used in official records. But to the men of the 501st, the ones who marched with him, bled beside him, he was something else. They called him Rex. And in the quiet spaces between orders, he began to shape what that name would mean. He trained harder than anyone else, not to prove something but to protect. He corrected his men with precision, but never cruelty. He earned loyalty not by shouting, but by listening. When soldiers panicked under fire, he was the one who steadied them. When medics were late, he was the one carrying the wounded. And when a brother died, he was the one who stayed behind, just long enough to make sure someone remembered. He didn't speak of it, he didn't write it down. But with every action, he built a name that wasn't given. A name that meant something. On one cold night before a drop mission, Jesse, still a rookie, then sat beside him in the hangar. He looked at Rex and asked the question no one else dared. "Why do you wear your hair different?" Rex looked at him, then at the other clones, all with shaved heads or matching styles. He reached up, touched the short golden blonde cut he'd kept since cadet days. "It's mine," he said simply. And Jesse nodded, as if that explained everything. Because maybe it did. That night, as the gunships rumbled to life, and the men of the 501st prepared for war, Rex stood at the front of the line. Not because he was ordered to, but because it was who he had become. And far above the battlefield, beyond the stars, the rain still fell on Kamino. But he would never go back. War was already waiting. There was no transition, no adjustment. The moment Rex stepped off the shuttle, he stepped into fire. Christophus was under siege. Separatist droids had locked down the capital, and the Republic was losing ground. The skies were filled with smoke. The streets were covered in ash. The civilians were gone, either evacuated or buried beneath the rubble. The enemy didn't care, and neither, it seemed, did the Republic. Rex had his orders. Hold the perimeter, secure the flank, report to General Skywalker. He obeyed them all. But even in those first hours, the war felt wrong. It wasn't just the destruction, he had been trained for that. It wasn't the droids they were expected. It was the silence between battles. The moments when the men sat in the shadows, armor scorched, eyes hollow, speaking no words. They weren't soldiers in those moments. They were survivors. And survivors always carried something they couldn't name. Rex began to understand that quickly. His first command was small. 2 squads, a dozen brothers. They moved with discipline, followed his signals, watched his hand gestures like lifelines. And then one of them died. CT-4809, no nickname yet, barely old enough to shave. A sniper bolt took him clean through the visor during a rooftop recon. There was no scream, no last words, just silence, then collapse. Rex froze for a moment, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing that he had ordered the advance, that he had led the mission, that his voice had carried a brother into death. He didn't cry, that wasn't how it worked. He just walked over, closed the fallen clone's eyes, and said nothing. There was no time for mourning. They had to move. That night, Rex stayed awake longer than the others. He sat with his rifle across his knees, helmet beside him, eyes fixed on the burning horizon. He thought of 4,809. Not as a number, not as a casualty, but as a boy he had once trained beside in the simulators. A boy who used to hum quietly between drills. A boy who never got to choose his name. And now never would. It wasn't supposed to feel this personal. The Kaminoans had drilled that out of them. But standing in the ruins of a world they didn't know, Rex felt something dangerous rising inside him. He didn't want to forget the dead. And that made him different. The next morning, he gathered the squad before deployment. He didn't give a speech. That wasn't his style. But he did something no clone captain had done before. He painted a single blue mark across the side of his helmet. For 4,809, he said. The others watched in silence, and slowly, one by one, they did the same. That was the beginning of something they wouldn't realize until much later. The beginning of the 501st, not just as a unit, but as a brotherhood. Later that day, Rex reported to General Skywalker in the command tent. The Jedi was pacing, as always, restless, intense, sharp-eyed. Rex saluted. Skywalker didn't look up. "Your squad took a loss yesterday," he said. "Yes, sir. You kept formation. We had to." Skywalker finally looked at him. "You're Rex, right?" "Yes, sir." The Jedi gave a small nod. "Good. I need someone who doesn't fall apart when things get messy." It wasn't praise, it wasn't comfort. But it was trust. And from that moment on, Rex would follow Anakin Skywalker into every battle the war could throw at them, not because of loyalty to the Republic, but because of something far more dangerous. Choice. He wasn't like the others. Anakin Skywalker didn't lead from a command table. He didn't hide behind shields. He fought at the front, always moving, always attacking, never hesitating. To many Jedi, it looked reckless. To the clones, it looked like courage. To Rex, it looked like something else. At first, he kept his distance. Jedi were generals, distant and powerful, untouchable. But Anakin made that impossible. He asked questions, challenged tactics, laughed. Sometimes. And when he looked Rex in the eyes, it wasn't like looking at a commander. It was like looking at someone trying to understand him. That was new. They started fighting together almost daily. Geonosis, Teth, Auto, Plutonia. Each battle changed them, not just physically, not just in rank, but in the way they saw the war. And the people caught in it. Skywalker didn't treat clones like property. He gave them time to rest, let them speak their minds, and when they spoke to him, he listened. It wasn't protocol. It was personal. That scared Rex more than he admitted. Because the more he trusted Anakin, the more he began to rely on his judgment, not just for strategy, but for truth. And in a war where lies were buried in every transmission, that kind of faith could be deadly. The Jedi Code said nothing about friendship, nothing about bonds, but Rex saw it happening, slowly, quietly. A connection that neither of them named, but one that shaped every mission that followed. There was one moment, early in the war, when a bridge collapsed during an assault. Rex and Anakin were cut off behind enemy lines. Supplies were low. Communications jammed. The rest of the battalion believed them dead. They weren't. They survived 6 days in the wilderness of Salokami, hunted, injured, cold. And during those nights beneath the stars, Rex saw the truth behind the general. Skywalker wasn't calm. He wasn't measured. He was angry, wounded, haunted. He spoke in fragments. About his master, Obi-Wan. About someone named Padme, though he never said who she was. About things the Jedi weren't supposed to feel. And Rex listened. Because in that moment, there were no ranks, no orders, just 2 men trying to survive something neither of them had chosen. When they finally made it back to base, Anakin said nothing to the others. He walked back into the war as if nothing had happened. But something had. From that point on, the soldiers of the 501st noticed it. The way Rex and Skywalker worked without speaking. The way they anticipated each other, covered for each other, carried each other through every impossible assault. Some called it luck, others called it loyalty. But Rex knew better. It was understanding. He didn't agree with everything Anakin did. There were moments of cruelty, of intensity that crossed lines Rex couldn't name. But he saw the cracks beneath it all. The doubt, the weight. And maybe that's what made Rex stay. Because behind the Jedi cloak was someone who was trying, not for power, not for pride, but for the people he cared about. And as the war deepened, and the missions blurred, and the line between right and wrong vanished in the haze of battle, that was the only thing that still made sense. Not the Republic, not the Council, but the Jedi he followed, and the promise he had made not out loud but in the silence between battles, that he would never let Anakin Skywalker fall alone. The war was full of victories, but none of them felt like peace. Every planet they liberated seemed to fall into ruin the moment they left. Every city they saved looked emptier than before, and every life they fought to protect came at the cost of brothers they couldn't replace. Still, the Republic kept pushing. Rex and the 501st became legends. Their blue-striped armor came to symbolize strength on the battlefield. Civilians cheered them. Jedi trusted them. Politicians used them in speeches. But in private, Rex saw what the records didn't. He saw the brothers who shook after battle, pretending they were fine. He saw the fresh recruits who barely lasted a week. And he saw the veterans, the ones who once laughed and told stories, grow quieter each month, as if something inside them was slipping away. He saw it because it was happening to him, too. The missions blurred together. Felucia, Ryloth, Umbara. Each world had its own tragedy. Each victory felt thinner than the last. Rex started carrying a list, names of fallen clones. He never shared it, never showed it. Just wrote them down after each battle. One name per line. Sometimes he forgot the face. But he never forgot the name, even if it was just a number. It wasn't protocol, it was memory. One day, after a siege on Skako Minor, he sat with Jesse, Kix, and Hardcase. They had won. The enemy had been pushed back. The Jedi were calling it a strategic success. But none of them smiled. Hardcase finally said it out loud. Feels like we're fighting just to stay alive, not to win anything. No one disagreed. Because somewhere along the way, the clones had realized something terrible. That they weren't fighting for peace. They were fighting for delay. Delay of collapse, delay of betrayal, delay of death. And the worst part was not knowing who they were delaying it for. The Jedi still spoke of hope. The Senate still promised change. But the war didn't stop. And every time it spread to a new system, the clones were the first to bleed. Rex found himself watching the news reports from Coruscant with quiet disbelief. Senators arguing, debates over funding, talks of loyalty and treason. They weren't there. They didn't see what the war really looked like. They didn't know what it cost. One day, during a campaign on Anaxes, a Republic transport failed to evacuate civilians. The clones had to hold the line while the families escaped. Rex lost 9 men that day, no Jedi, no officers. Just clones. The mission report called it acceptable loss. Rex said nothing, but that night, he added the names to his list. 9 new lines. 9 more reasons to question what they were really fighting for. He didn't stop fighting. He never considered disobedience. But the voice inside him, the one that first spoke on Kamino, had returned. And it whispered the same thing again. Something is wrong. The Jedi sensed it, too. Some spoke in whispers. Some deflected with silence. Others, like Skywalker, buried it beneath action. But it was there. A shadow moving through the war. Not the separatists. Not the droids, something deeper, unnamed, felt, but never seen. And as the Republic closed in on the outer rim, and the Senate demanded final victories, Rex realized something no commander ever wanted to say. That winning no longer meant saving anything. It just meant surviving one more day. And for the clones of the 501st, those days were running out. It didn't wear armor. It didn't fire a blaster. And yet, it killed more clones than any droid Rex had ever faced. The enemy with no face. It moved through orders, through politics, through silence. It shaped missions without reason. It changed objectives mid-battle. It turned strategy into confusion and trust into doubt. At first, Rex didn't notice it. None of them did. The war was chaotic by nature. But as weeks turned into years, patterns began to emerge. Patterns that made no tactical sense. Entire squads sent into traps, reinforcements delayed without reason. Intelligence reports that vanished. Jedi who disappeared, and clone commanders told to proceed, no matter the cost. One mission stood out. Palex 9. It was supposed to be a small operation, a separatist weapons outpost, lightly defended. Recon showed minimal resistance, but when the 501st landed, they were ambushed. Full battalion of B-2 droids, no escape, no air support. Rex barely made it out alive. 47 men didn't. When he reviewed the orders afterward, something struck him. The intel hadn't been wrong, it had been fabricated. He filed a report, requested an inquiry. No response. He tried again, still nothing. And then, quietly, the logs were wiped. It wasn't an accident. It was design. The realization hit him harder than any battle. Someone somewhere was using them. Not as soldiers, not as protectors. As pieces. He started looking deeper, reviewing past missions, talking to other commanders in coded channels. Cody, Bly, even Wolf. They were seeing it too: inconsistencies, patterns, mistakes that weren't mistakes. But there was no proof, and no answers. Because the true enemy didn't leave footprints. It gave orders, and let good soldiers follow them. That was the trap. The clones had been trained to obey. Every part of them from birth to battlefield was designed to follow. And now, that obedience was being weaponized. Not by the separatists. By something closer. Something behind the Senate. Behind the war. Rex began to change after that. He still followed commands. Still led his men with discipline. Still stood at Skywalker's side in every conflict. But inside, he was watching. Watching how the orders came down. How they shifted in language. How the Jedi reacted. Some accepted them. Others questioned. A few vanished. And each time one did, a new clone commander was promoted in his place. Quietly, efficiently, without question. It began to feel like the war had a script, one no one had read, one that only a few were beginning to suspect existed. But it was too late. The machine was already in motion. Rex kept his doubts buried, even from Anakin, especially from Anakin, because something in Skywalker's eyes had changed too. He was more volatile now, more distant, carrying weight that couldn't be seen, only felt. Rex didn't ask. He couldn't. Because to ask would be to break the chain, and the chain was the only thing still holding the galaxy together. Or so he thought. Late one night aboard the Resolute, Rex sat alone in the observation deck. Stars drifted by. The war slept, but his mind wouldn't. He pulled out the small datapad he kept hidden beneath his chest plate. Scrolled through the names. Paused. Then added one more. CT-1155 lost on Palex 9. Misinformation, no justice. He closed the file. And whispered the only words that still made sense. We were never meant to win this. And far away, in chambers filled with red light and secrets, the enemy with no face prepared its final move. There was a line in every battle. A point you weren't supposed to cross. Not for power, not for victory, not even to survive. But Anakin Skywalker crossed it often. And Rex followed him. At first, it felt like a blessing. Most Jedi played by the rules. They waited, calculated, trusted the Council more than their own instincts. But Anakin moved like the rules were already broken. He acted with the urgency of someone who knew time was running out even when no one else could see it. And it worked. His attacks were bold, his retreats were traps. He saw through separatist deception like he had already lived it before. And Rex was always there, moving in sync, never needing to ask why. But with every mission, the line shifted. They liberated prisoners from a Confederate slave ship by disabling the life support systems, nearly killing the very people they came to save. They ended a siege on Mareni by collapsing a communications tower that buried 2 city blocks. Rex didn't ask for the casualty report. He didn't need to, because he could feel the weight in his chest before the numbers ever came in. And each time, Anakin said the same thing. We had no choice. Sometimes, Rex agreed. Sometimes, he didn't. But he never said that out loud. Because this wasn't like following orders from a faceless command. This was different. Personal. Human. He trusted Anakin not just as a general, but as a man who was trying to end a war in a galaxy that didn't know what peace looked like anymore. And that trust became something heavier than loyalty. It became silence. There was a moment on Yagdhul. The droid attack had been brutal, a full battalion overwhelmed, reinforcements cut off. Anakin's plan was desperate. Breach the core reactor to trigger a localized blackout, then strike in the dark. The blackout worked, but the reactor breach didn't go clean. Dozens of clones were caught in the collapse. Rex pulled what survivors he could, dragging them through the smoke, armor half melted, lungs full of poison. They won the battle. The price was never officially recorded. Anakin came to him after, not as a general, as a friend. I didn't know the radius would be that wide. Rex didn't respond, just stared out at the wreckage. You saved 100 lives, Anakin said. Rex nodded once. But the number in his mind wasn't 100. It was 38. 38 who didn't walk out. Anakin never brought it up again, and Rex never asked him to. Because in war, there were lines that blurred, and then there were lines that vanished. The Jedi were supposed to be better than that, but Anakin wasn't like the others. His pain was closer to the surface. His fury burned without warning. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between missions, Rex could feel it building. He didn't fear it, but he watched it. Because behind every reckless decision, behind every near miss and narrow victory, Rex could feel something breaking. Not in the war, not in the Republic, but in the man he trusted most. Still, Rex stood beside him. Because even when the orders were flawed, even when the outcomes left him hollow, there was one truth he couldn't let go of. That Anakin Skywalker never saw him as property. Never saw him as a number. He looked Rex in the eye, clone or not, and treated him like an equal. And in a galaxy that built the clones to be silent, replaceable shadows, that meant everything. Even if it meant following him across the line. The Ryloth campaign was supposed to be simple. Clear the blockade, secure the capital, liberate the Twi'lek people. But nothing in this war was ever simple. By the time Rex arrived planetside with the 501st, the Separatists had already scorched half the continent. Families were hiding in caves. Children were starving. Minds were wired with traps. The enemy wasn't fighting for control. It was fighting to leave nothing behind. And once again, Anakin was given command of the impossible. He didn't flinch. He never did. But this time, he wasn't alone. General Mace Windu was leading the final assault. Senator Orn Freetar had returned to oversee the transition. Political eyes were everywhere. The Jedi Council was watching. which meant Skywalker had to play by rules he didn't believe in. Rex saw the tension before anyone else did. The tightness in Anakin's voice. The way his hands clenched when Tar spoke. The way he looked at the ruins of the villages with something deeper than anger. Something close to guilt. Rex didn't ask what was wrong. He just followed the mission. Their objective was a central munitions depot deep in separatist-controlled territory. The intel said it was lightly guarded, but the intel was wrong. By the time they reached the site, the droids had already activated self-destruct protocols. The whole complex was wired to blow. And inside, trapped in the storage vaults, were civilians. Rylothian farmers, workers, children. Anakin froze for only a moment. Then he turned to Rex. "We're going in." Windu's orders were clear: do not engage without authorization. The risk was too high, but Skywalker didn't care. And Rex didn't hesitate. The charge through the tunnels was chaos. Blaster fire, collapsing ceilings, screams through dust and flame. Rex took a bolt to the shoulder but kept moving. Anakin cut through a dozen droids, his saber blazing in the smoke. And when they reached the civilians, it wasn't victory they felt. It was relief. The group was small, less than 30, but to those people, it meant everything. An old Twi'lek man fell to his knees and kissed Anakin's hand. Rex turned away, pretending not to see the look in Skywalker's eyes. It wasn't pride. It was pain. They got out just before the vaults exploded. Windu was furious. The Senate issued a formal reprimand, but the people of Ryloth didn't care. To them, Anakin Skywalker was a hero. And to Rex, he was something harder to define. That night, they sat outside the camp on a cliff overlooking the valley. The sky above was filled with drifting ash, like snow that had forgotten what warmth was. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Anakin said it quietly, as if confessing to the stars. "We weren't supposed to be here." Rex looked at him. "You mean Ryloth?" "No," he said. "Us. All of it. The war. The clones. Me." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said. And Rex didn't know how to answer. So he made a promise instead. "If it ever comes to it," Rex said, "I'll have your back." Anakin didn't nod, didn't thank him. He just whispered, "I know." Then he stood and walked away. Rex stayed on that cliff for a long time after, watching the valley burn slowly in the distance, thinking about the promise he had made, and wondering, quietly, if it would ever be enough. Because deep inside, he already knew. One day, that promise would be tested. And on that day, the cost would be higher than anything he was ready for. Rex had been trained to follow orders. But over time, he began learning something far more dangerous. How to keep secrets. It started small. Strategic omissions in mission reports. Quiet glances between commanders when protocol didn't match reality. The things Jedi did in the field were not always what the Senate expected, and what the clones witnessed was never meant to be shared. But with Anakin, the secrets were different. More personal, more fragile. The first time Rex saw her, it was by accident. A transmission flickered onto the command holotable in the middle of hyperspace. A woman's face, soft voice, concern in her eyes. Senator Padme Amidala. Rex turned to speak, but Anakin was already there, closing the channel with a wave of his hand. "Glitch," he muttered. "Happens sometimes." Rex didn't ask. But he knew. He saw the way Anakin's expression changed when her name came up in briefings, how he vanished between missions without a word, how he took risks no other Jedi would, just to save one transport, one diplomat, one system. Love wasn't part of the Jedi code. But Rex had watched men die, had watched them cry out for brothers, for memories, for something to believe in when the battlefield stripped everything else away. He didn't blame Anakin for holding on to someone, even if it meant breaking the rules. So he carried the secret, not as blackmail, not as leverage, as protection. Because if the council found out, if the wrong voice spoke at the wrong time, everything Anakin had built would be turned against him. And Rex couldn't allow that. Not after everything they'd been through. Not after everything Anakin had done for them. But keeping one secret made the others easier. When Fives started asking questions about the inhibitor chips, Rex listened. He watched. He filed it away. Even when Fives broke protocol and went rogue, even when the Kaminoans called him defective, Rex hesitated. Because he remembered how many times the Republic had lied, how many missions had been based on altered data, how many good men had died for plans that didn't add up. He didn't stop Fives, but he didn't stop the investigation either. He stood in that limbo, between loyalty and truth, between duty and conscience. The same place Anakin stood every day. And slowly, Rex began to understand that trust wasn't just about orders. It wasn't about structure. It was about the things you protected when no one else would. He remembered once, on Coruscant, during a brief shore leave, Anakin asked him to wait outside a senator's apartment while he delivered a message. Rex didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood guard while speeder traffic echoed overhead. It was an hour before Skywalker returned. No words, no explanations. But in the way he nodded at Rex just once, the meaning was clear. Thank you. Not for silence. For understanding. That was the foundation they had built, not from orders, but from choices. The kind you make when the war strips everything else away. Still, secrets had weight. Rex carried them through every mission, every loss, every late-night debriefing when he couldn't tell the full story. He carried them when brothers asked questions, when Jedi raised concerns, when the Senate demanded clarity. He held the line not for the Republic, not even for the war, but for the bond that had become the only thing still real. Anakin trusted him with everything. And Rex never failed him. Not yet. But the closer they came to the end, the more Rex felt it. The weight growing heavier. The silence getting louder. And the day coming when every secret he carried would no longer be enough to stop what was coming. There was a moment, quiet and small, when Rex finally understood what he had become. It wasn't during a battle. Not during a victory. Not even during one of the impossible missions that defined the 501st. It happened on a transport, drifting through hyperspace, on a night when the engines hummed like a heartbeat in the dark. Anakin was sitting alone in the cargo bay, no lights, no armor, just a man curled forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was praying to something he didn't believe in anymore. Rex approached quietly. Skywalker didn't look up, didn't pretend to be strong, didn't tell him to leave. He just let the moment breathe between them, heavy with something neither of them had words for. After a long pause, Anakin exhaled. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing," he whispered. Rex had heard Jedi speak with confidence, clarity, wisdom, but this was different. This was a man who spent every day pretending he wasn't breaking under the weight of a galaxy that demanded too much from him. Rex didn't know the details, not all of them. But he knew enough. He knew Anakin was scared. He knew Anakin was lonely. And he knew the war was tearing him apart from the inside. So Rex said something he had never said to anyone. "You don't have to do it alone." Anakin finally looked at him, not with surprise, not with confusion, but with a kind of tired gratitude that cut deeper than any wound. In that expression, Rex saw the truth that had formed without either of them noticing. He wasn't just a commander. He wasn't just another clone. Somewhere along the way, he had become the person Anakin leaned on when the galaxy became too heavy. A friend, a confidant, a shield. Someone, the chosen, one of the Jedi Order, trusted when he trusted no one else. And that changed everything. From then on, Rex carried himself differently. He still followed orders, still obeyed protocol. But there was something in the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he looked at his brothers before each mission. He wasn't leading them because he was programmed to. He was leading them because he cared. Not just about the war. About them. Hardcase, Kix, Jesse, top fives. They weren't numbers to him. They weren't units. They were names he said quietly when the engines slowed and the lights dimmed on long hyperspace jumps. Names he protected more fiercely than his own life. And Anakin saw it. One day, after a near-fatal ambush on Lola Sayu, Skywalker pulled him aside. "You did more than save the mission," Anakin said. "You saved them." Rex shook his head. "They saved each other." Anakin put a hand on his shoulder. "No, they follow you because they believe in you." Rex didn't respond. He wasn't used to praise. He wasn't designed for it. But the words echoed in him long after the battle was over. Because deep inside, he knew what Anakin meant. That any clone could fight. Any clone could obey. But Rex had become something the Kaminoans never planned for. Someone his brothers trusted. Someone his general depended on. Someone who carried more than a blaster on the battlefield. He carried hope even when he didn't feel it himself. And yet, with every step forward, with every bond strengthened, with every moment Anakin looked to him instead of the Council, Rex felt something rising in the distance. A shadow neither of them could see. A moment coming that would test everything they had built, every mission, every secret, every promise. Because the war wasn't ending. It was tightening. And the closer they moved toward the final days, the clearer it became. Being more than a soldier would not save him. It would break him. The skies of Umbara never cleared. Even from orbit, the planet looked wrong, black storms swirling above a surface soaked in shadow. It wasn't just the atmosphere. It was the feeling. Like something ancient and broken was buried beneath the soil, and the planet had spent centuries trying to forget it. Rex didn't like it, none of them did. But the 501st had no say. General Anakin Skywalker had been recalled to Coruscant. No explanation. No delay. One moment he was in command. The next he was gone. And in his place came General Pong Krell. Rex had heard of him, the basilisk Jedi with 4 arms, twin sabers, and a reputation for brutal efficiency. He was known for results, not relationships. A warrior, not a teacher. But nothing could have prepared Rex for the way Krell treated the clones. They weren't soldiers to him. They were numbers, blades, tools. Replaceable. From the moment he arrived, Krell dismissed all prior tactics. ignored field intel, sent wave after wave of troopers through the thick, toxic jungle without pause. No recon, no caution, just orders. Advance, overwhelm, die, if needed. Rex obeyed at first, because that was what he was trained to do. Because command structure couldn't break in the middle of war. Because questioning a Jedi was never an option. But each hour under Krell made it harder. Clones were falling by the dozens, ambushed in blind terrain, cut off from support, gunned down in friendly fire corridors. Krell didn't flinch, he didn't grieve, he didn't even pause to learn their names. "You were bred for this," he said. And Rex felt something twist in his chest. He had fought alongside Jedi who broke the rules, Jedi who struggled, Jedi who tried. But Krell didn't struggle. He didn't try. He commanded like someone who didn't see life as sacred. Like someone who had already chosen the other side. The men began to whisper. Fives, hard case, Tup. They weren't just questioning orders. They were questioning the Republic. The war. What it meant to die in a system that called you property in everything but name. Rex tried to keep them focused, tried to remind them of the mission, tried to stay loyal. But each time another brother fell, each time Krell sent them into another trap, another suicide run, another necessary loss, the voice inside him grew louder. This isn't how Jedi lead. One night, after losing an entire squad to a miscalculated push through the Umbaran airbase, Rex confronted Krell, not with rebellion, just a question. "Sir, with respect, these losses are unsustainable." Krell stared down at him with contempt. "They are clones. They were created to serve. And if you can't stomach the reality of war, Captain, I will find someone who can." That was it. No names, no acknowledgement, no humanity. Just the kind of cold obedience that could kill 1,000 men without blinking. Rex said nothing. He saluted. And he walked away. But something inside him had cracked. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a slaughter. And the longer he followed Krell, the more Rex began to realize. They weren't fighting for victory. They were being tested. Not by the enemy, by the very system they had sworn to protect. And if he didn't make a choice soon, he'd lose more than his men. He'd lose himself. Names mattered to Rex. They were the only thing the Kaminoans didn't give them. Numbers were assigned, armor was standardized, even their voices were the same. But names were claimed, earned, given in moments of courage or laughter or pain. And Krell never used them. To him, there were no fives, no Jesse, no Tup or Dogma or hard case. Only ranks, units, designations. CT 5597, ARC Trooper 1409, Trooper 782. As if their faces didn't matter. As if the sacrifices they made weren't worth remembering. Each time Krell barked a new order, Rex felt the distance widen not just between commander and clone, but between who they were and who they were becoming. Because without names, they were just weapons. Disposable, silent, forgotten. One morning, just before dawn cycle, Fives found Rex sitting alone, helmet off, arms folded across his knees. "You look like you haven't slept in days," Fives said. "I haven't," Rex replied. Fives sat beside him, quiet for a moment. Then, softly, "We can't keep doing this." Rex didn't respond, because he knew Fives was right. The casualty lists were growing longer by the hour. Entire squads were being funneled into kill zones without support. Krell kept insisting the clones were not thinking hard enough, not pushing hard enough, not dying fast enough. When Dogma spoke up in defense of Krell, Rex almost snapped, but he held it in. Dogma wasn't the problem. He was what the Republic wanted them to be: obedient, unquestioning, loyal to death. Rex used to be that way too. But Umbara had stripped the armor down to the bone, left only the raw truth, that loyalty without humanity was just programming. And programming was what Krell wanted. No hesitation, no resistance, no names. Only orders. When Hardcase died blowing up the Umbaran supply ship, no one informed the Jedi Council. No medals, no ceremony. Just another name on a datapad Rex kept hidden behind his chest plate. He wrote it down by hand, slowly, as if that act could bring his brother back. Hardcase, brave, loud, reckless, loyal. Rex didn't cry. Clones weren't taught to. But grief was there, always there. Fives watched him write the name, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're not droids, Rex." He wasn't just a soldier. Rex nodded. "I know." It wasn't until the friendly fire incident that the weight finally cracked open. 2 clone squads, each told to eliminate an advancing Umbaran force, each approaching from opposite sides of the ridge, each fired on the other. By the time Rex and Fives arrived, the field was covered in bodies, blue markings, Republic armor, familiar voices silenced by blind obedience. Rex dropped to his knees beside one of them, pulled off the helmet. Waxer. He had once saved a little girl on Ryloth, had carried her through a war zone, had laughed about it later in the mess hall. Now he was dead, killed by his own brothers. And all because Krell had sent them both into a lie. That night, Rex didn't sleep. He just stared at the list in his datapad. Names blurring together. Names that used to smile. Names that used to breathe. He added one more. Waxer, quiet, brave, kind. No clone ever said it out loud, but they all felt it. That Umbara wasn't just killing them physically. It was erasing who they were. And if Krell had his way, they would die without names. Die without memory. Die as numbers. But Rex wasn't ready to let that happen. Not yet. Not without a fight. It was a trap. But not from the Separatists. Not from Umbarans. It came from within. After the friendly fire incident, Krell doubled down. No apologies, no acknowledgement of the lives lost. Just new orders, vague, aggressive, and strangely urgent. Advance on the capital. Eliminate all enemy units approaching from the northern corridor. Do not hesitate. Rex hesitated. Because the last time Krell had rushed them, they killed their own. Because the air felt different now, heavier, colder, like the war had stopped pretending to be a cause and started showing its teeth. But the 501st moved anyway. Because they always did. They were tired, angry, broken, but still loyal, not to Krell, not anymore, but to each other. And in that bond, they found a kind of strength that orders couldn't take away. They reached the corridor at dusk. The jungle around them was silent. No movement. No droids. Then shadows moved through the mist fast, low, coordinated. Blaster fire lit the trees. Rex took cover behind a fallen trunk and opened fire. The squad followed. "Push forward," he shouted. But something was wrong. Too many were falling too fast. The enemy wasn't acting like Umbarans. Their formation was wrong. Their weapons too precise. And then a voice came through the comms. Garbled, panicked. 501st. You're not. Wait, stop. Rex froze. The truth hit like a shock wave. They were firing on the 212th. Another clone battalion. Another part of the Republic. Another piece of Krell's war. Cease fire, Rex roared. But it was too late. The clearing was littered with Republic armor, blue and orange. Brothers shot down by brothers. Not because they wanted to, not because they failed. Because someone had turned them into enemies. Because someone was testing how far obedience could go before it broke. The squad pulled back in silence. Fives threw his helmet into the mud. Kix punched a tree until his knuckles bled. Jesse just stared into the dark, like he was trying to wake up from something he didn't understand. Rex stood in the center of it all, hands shaking, eyes wide, breath shallow. This wasn't a battle. It was betrayal, engineered, delivered with precision. And it had come from above. Later that night, under cover of thick cloud, Rex reviewed the orders again. Read them line by line. There was no doubt. Krell had known. He had orchestrated it. Pitted clone against clone to weaken morale, to test discipline, to see if their loyalty would override their humanity. And for most, it had. Rex could barely look at himself in the reflection of his visor, because he had followed the order too. He had fired, not a full shot, not a confirmed kill, but he had pulled the trigger on a brother. The line between soldier and enemy had finally collapsed. And they were all standing in the wreckage. Fives found him again, voice shaking, jaw tight. We can't take this anymore. We have to stop him. Rex didn't answer. Because deep down, he agreed. For the first time in his life, he was prepared to disobey. Not because he wanted to. Because the war had made it clear. The enemy wasn't always on the other side of the field. Sometimes the enemy wore your armor. Sometimes he gave you orders. Sometimes he wore the robes of a Jedi. The moment came in silence. No battle, no gunfire, no transmission from high command. Just the weight of one choice waiting in the dark. Rex stood outside Krell's command post, armor scraped, body shaking, mind spiraling. Inside, the general was already preparing the next wave, another push, another slaughter. Another lie wrapped in orders. This wasn't about strategy anymore. It wasn't about winning. It was about control. How far would the clones go before they broke? That was Krell's question. And Rex was about to answer it. Fives, Jesse, and a small team had taken it further, captured Krell's movements, intercepted his orders, followed him deep into the forest. And there, they found the truth. He had been communing with the dark side. Not as a secret, not in shame. With purpose. He had seen the fall of the Jedi, the rise of a new order, and he wanted to prove himself worthy of it. Not by defecting, by breaking the clones first, proving they could be turned, molded, used against themselves. He didn't need to win battles. He just needed them to follow one more time. And Rex almost had. They locked Krell in the holding cell at the base of the tower. He was unarmed, unrepentant, pacing like a caged animal. He looked at Rex with something close to pity. You think you're free, he said, but you were never anything more than a weapon. You're just too blind to know it. Rex said nothing. The men stood behind him, silent, waiting, for justice, for closure, for the weight to lift. But it didn't. Because executing a traitor wasn't justice. It was a reminder that this war had turned them into something they were never meant to be. Dogma was the one who pulled the trigger. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The most loyal, the most obedient, the one who had defended Krell to the end, was the one who ended him. When it was over, no one cheered, no one spoke. They buried the general in a shallow grave beneath the twisted roots of Umbara. No marker, no name. Just one more ghost swallowed by a planet that had already taken too much. Back at camp, Rex sat alone, helmet in his lap, staring at the insignia of the 501st. It didn't look the same anymore. It didn't feel like pride. It felt like survival. The Jedi never came to ask what happened. The Senate never filed a report. Umbara was marked as a Republic victory. But Rex didn't feel like they had won. He felt like something had been stripped away, something deeper than armor, more permanent than blood. Faith. Not just in the Republic, not even in the Jedi. In himself. Because now he knew the truth. That good men could be made to kill each other. That loyalty could be used as a weapon. That following orders could break the very soul it was meant to protect. Umbara had taken his brothers. But it had taken something else, too. The line that once divided right from wrong. And in the silence that followed, Rex was left with only one vow. Never again. Never without reason. Never without question. Never without remembering that behind every helmet was a face, a voice, a name. The war would go on. The battles would return. But something inside him had changed forever. Because now he understood the price of obedience and the truth that would haunt him until the very end. Sometimes the hardest enemy to fight is the one you were told to follow. It started with Tup, a good soldier, loyal, quiet, the kind of trooper who followed orders not because he feared punishment, but because he believed in the mission. Then one day, he shot a Jedi in the middle of a briefing. No warning, no rage, just a blaster to the chest, point blank. And when they asked him why, he didn't answer, couldn't answer. He just repeated one phrase over and over like it was the only thing left in his mind. Good soldiers follow orders. Rex heard about it from the medics first, then from Fives. Tup had been taken off the battlefield, shipped to Kamino for evaluation. But the story didn't add up. He wasn't sick, he wasn't broken, he had snapped. Fives pushed harder, dug into the records, pulled surveillance, followed the escort team when no one was watching. What he found changed everything. A chip, not a scar, not a trauma wound. An implant, grown inside Tup's brain before he was even born. It wasn't a defect. It was a design. Rex didn't believe it at first. He couldn't. They were soldiers, not machines. They were trained, not programmed. But Fives was convinced, obsessed even. He said every clone had one. Said it was part of a larger plan. A secret buried so deep that even the Jedi didn't know it was there. The Kaminoans called it behavioral modification, a fail-safe. They claimed it was a precaution, something to maintain control in the chaos of war. But Fives saw it for what it was. Control. Rex met with him in secret. He still remembered the look in Fives' eyes, hollow, hunted, desperate. He wasn't ranting. He wasn't panicked. He was trying to save them. "There's something wrong inside us, Rex," he whispered. "And when it activates, we won't even know." Rex didn't know what to say. He wanted to believe it was paranoia, that Fives had seen too much, that Umbara had pushed him over the edge, that Tup's death was just trauma, not treason. But the doubt was already there. Because deep down, Rex had always known something wasn't right. The way the Republic never asked for their opinions, the way the Kaminoans tracked their behavior, the way his own instincts sometimes felt like they didn't belong to him. Now he had a reason for that feeling, and it terrified him. Still, he didn't act. He didn't investigate. He didn't disobey. Because the consequences were too big. Because if Fives was right, then the clones weren't free. They never had been. Fives kept digging, kept pushing, went rogue. They branded him a traitor, put a price on his head. Rex tried to protect him, to keep the Council from ordering a termination. But the machine had already decided. And Rex was too slow to stop it. That's what stayed with him the longest. Not the truth, the delay. That even when his brother was trying to save them all, Rex still hesitated, still trusted the system long enough for it to silence the only voice brave enough to speak. And somewhere, in the back of his mind, he already knew. One day, the chip inside him would activate, and he wouldn't be able to stop it. Not with strength, not with will, not with anything he had learned. Because it wasn't about thought. It was about control. And when the moment came, he wouldn't know he had crossed the line. Until it was already too late. Fives ran because no one listened. Not the Kaminoans, not the Jedi, not even Rex. He had seen the truth in medical scans, in Top's death, in the silence that followed every question he asked. And when the system rejected him, he didn't surrender. He went rogue. Rex watched it unfold in real time. Transmission delays, missing reports. Fives disappearing into Coruscant's underlevels with only his armor, a stolen datapad, and the weight of the galaxy on his back. They called him unstable, said he'd snapped, said his mental state had been compromised. But Rex remembered the last words Fives had spoken to him in private. It's not just the chip, Rex, it's everything. The whole war, it's a lie. We're part of something we were never meant to understand. Rex hadn't believed him. Not fully. Not then. He wanted to. But wanting wasn't enough. He still clung to the idea that someone would stop it, that the Jedi would intervene, that Fives could find a way to prove what he'd discovered and walk away alive. But Coruscant didn't give second chances, not to clones, not to truth. Fives broke into a secure medical facility, tried to reach Senator Organa, made contact with General Skywalker barely. He nearly had the evidence, nearly got someone to listen. But nearly wasn't enough. The last time Rex saw him, he was lying on the floor of a warehouse, blaster wound in his gut, blood staining the metal beneath him. Anakin knelt beside him. Rex stood frozen. And Fives just looked up. "They're going to kill us all," he whispered. His voice was barely a breath, his eyes already fading. "I only wanted to do my duty." And then he was gone. Rex didn't speak, couldn't. He just stared at the body of a brother who had died not in battle, but in pursuit of truth. There was no funeral, no honors. His death was buried in silence, sealed by reports that labeled him a traitor and a security threat. The chip was dismissed as a biological anomaly. The Republic moved on. But Rex didn't. He couldn't. Because Fives had been the only one brave enough to pull at the threads, to follow them all the way down, even when it meant losing everything, even when no one stood beside him. And in that loss, something inside Rex began to shift. He went back through the data, quietly, alone, reviewed what Fives had uncovered, looked again at the medical records, at the behavior shifts, at the way the Kaminoans spoke around the subject instead of through it. And the fear that Fives had carried like a burning brand became his own, not loud, not immediate, but constant. Because now Rex knew the truth. Something had been placed inside them, all of them, not to protect the Republic, to destroy it, not for loyalty, for control. And when the time came, when the switch was flipped, when the moment arrived that none of them could see coming, they would turn, not because they wanted to, because they were made to. And no one would know until it was too late. Not even Rex. Rex returned to Kamino with questions. Not loud ones, not written, just the kind you carry in your eyes. The kind that follow you through the sterile halls of Tipoca City. The kind that make the white corridors feel more like coffins. The kind that Fives died for. Officially, he was there for standard post-deployment recovery, a rotation the Republic mandated after extended frontline duty. But Rex knew what he was really there to do. Look, listen, observe. Because Fives hadn't been wrong. Not entirely. Not about the chip. Not about the silence. Rex started with the medics, clone specialists, Kaminoan supervisors. He kept his tone casual, polite, even deferential. He asked what they thought about the top incident, about chip integrity, about inhibitor behavior. The answers came like rain. Cold, clean, rehearsed. It was a rare degenerative malfunction. No further cases have been observed. All clone batches have passed full compliance. They spoke like nothing had ever happened, like Top hadn't broken down in front of a Jedi, like Fives hadn't been executed in an alley trying to expose a truth buried beneath their skin. Rex watched the Kaminoans closely, especially Nala Say. She never blinked, never hesitated. Clone CT-5555 was mentally compromised by trauma, she said, her voice as calm as a surgical knife. He posed a threat to the stability of your legion. His removal was necessary. Necessary, Rex repeated. The word felt like poison in his mouth. Later that night, he walked through the barracks. The same rows of bunks he had slept in as a cadet. The same long hallway of silent bodies, all dressed the same, all bred to serve. He paused by a group of young clones, Alpha batch, barely older than children. They saluted when they saw him. He nodded and kept walking. But the image stayed with him. They didn't know, none of them knew, that buried inside their heads beneath the training, beneath the loyalty, beneath everything they thought made them who they were, was something designed to take it all away. Not when they failed. When they obeyed. And worse, no one outside Kamino seemed to care. The Jedi hadn't followed up. The Senate had gone quiet. The war kept moving forward like nothing had changed. Because to the Republic, nothing had. Clones were still assets, still tools, still expected to fall in line when the time came, whether they wanted to or not. And if Fives had uncovered a flaw in the design, they would rather bury him than fix it. Rex stood alone in the observation dome the next morning. Rain hammered the glass. The ocean beneath churned in gray silence. He placed a hand on the cold surface, tried to feel something beneath the storm. But all he felt was stillness. Not peace, just absence. He didn't know what he could do. He couldn't remove the chip. He couldn't prove the conspiracy. He couldn't risk open rebellion. Not yet. All he had was time. And a quiet resolve. He would watch his brothers more closely, track changes, learn what he could. Keep records the Kaminoans didn't know about. Protect the men he still had even if they never knew what he was protecting them from. Because the storm Fives tried to stop was still coming. It just hadn't arrived yet. And when it did, Rex swore he would be ready. There was no warning. No tremor in the Force. No transmission from Kamino. No time to prepare. Just a flicker in the sky. And then, Order 66. It came like thunder in the dark. One moment, they were marching beside Jedi. The next, their blasters were raised. For most clones, it was instant. No resistance, no hesitation. Just a voice in their minds, clear, final, absolute. Execute Order 66. And they did. Across the galaxy, Jedi fell. Shot in the back, surrounded, betrayed by the very soldiers they had trained, bled and grieved beside. Some never saw it coming. Others looked into the eyes of men they called brothers, and saw nothing staring back. Rex was lucky. Luck was the only word for it. Because just before the command reached him, something broke through. A warning. A spark. Ahsoka Tano. She had returned. Not as a Jedi, not as an officer. Just as a friend, one last mission together. One last ride into the end of a war that had already cost them both too much. And in that final moment, as the order began to twist through his mind, as his hand reached for his blaster without his permission, he said her name. Ahsoka. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to slow the chip, enough to fight, enough to make her run. He turned on her. He didn't want to, but he did. And even as he fought the programming, even as his hands trembled and his vision blurred, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Fives had been right. This was the plan. This had always been the plan. Not just to end the war, to end the Jedi. To use the clones as executioners, as weapons, as the final betrayal. And Rex had almost played his part. The moments that followed were chaos. Ahsoka escaped, stunned him, dragged him to safety, removed the chip with help from droids who didn't understand why the world was falling apart. When he woke, he was still shaking. Not from the surgery, from the truth. He remembered everything, every breath, every word. He had almost killed her. The only person left in the galaxy who still trusted him. And he would never forget it. Together, they fought their way through the cruiser, surrounded by brothers who no longer saw him as their captain, who only saw a target, a traitor. He didn't shoot to kill. Even as they hunted him, Rex held back, fired to disarm, knock out, delay. Because these weren't enemies. They were his men, his friends, his family. And he knew, in that final hour, what Fives must have felt before the end. Helpless. Alone. Too late to save them. The ship crashed, buried itself beneath a nameless moon. Hundreds died. Clones who had no choice, no warning. Just a switch flipped by hands they never knew. Rex buried them. Each grave marked, each helmet placed with care. Not as soldiers, as brothers. Ahsoka placed her lightsabers at the base of the final mound, walked into the mist without a word, And Rex stood there, alone, as the smoke rose and the stars turned cold. There were no answers, only grief. And the voice of Fives echoing in his mind. They're going to kill us all. He hadn't meant it literally. But in the end, it was true. Because what they killed wasn't just the Jedi. They killed trust. They killed choice. They killed the one thing that had made them human. And no one listened. Not until it was too late. It happened in a moment. One flicker, one command, one voice that didn't sound like his but used his own mouth to speak. Execute Order 66. He felt it before he heard it. A cold pull, a silence, deep and sharp, sliding through his mind like a blade. Everything slowed, then stopped, then changed. He was standing beside her, Ahsoka. She had just returned, no longer a Jedi, no longer part of the Order. But she wore the same robes, carried the same weight. And the chip didn't care about technicalities. The chip only knew what it was built to do. Rex fought it. Not with strength, not with training, not with weapons. With memory. He remembered Umbara, Krell, the orders that had led good men to kill each other. He remembered Fives, the warnings, the whisper of something wrong buried beneath the surface. He remembered what it felt like to lose control. And now, it was happening to him. He dropped the datapad in his hand, clutched his helmet as his vision split in two. His knees buckled. Ahsoka turned to him. "Rex?" Her voice was calm, concerned, and the chip tried to bury it. Tried to twist that concern into a threat. Tried to replace her face with a target. Tried to turn her name into a command. Kill her. He couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. But he remembered Fives. And in the final moment, just before the darkness took full control, he reached for the only thing that could save her. His voice. "Find Fives." That's all he could say. Then it took him. His hand reached for his blaster. His body moved with precision. His heart pounded behind armor he no longer recognized. And somewhere in the back of his mind, the real Rex, the one who cared, the one who chose, the one who remembered, screamed. But no one heard. Because the chip was in command now. The blaster shook in his hand. Not from hesitation, not from fear. From something deeper, a fracture between will and obedience. A place where a soldier's loyalty had been weaponized against him. Rex pulled the trigger. The bolt missed. It wasn't luck. Ahsoka moved faster than most would have. She had seen something in his eyes, something broken. She dodged before the second shot could land. She didn't draw her lightsabers. She didn't fight him. She ran. Because she understood what Rex couldn't say. This wasn't him. It was the chip. It was the programming Fives had died trying to stop. The order the Kaminoans had buried beneath their skulls like a time bomb. And now it had gone off. The clones poured into the hangar. Jesse, Kix, Vaughn. Men who had once bled for her, laughed with her, fought beside her. Now, they moved as one. Weapons raised, faces empty. Commander Tano is to be terminated for treason. It wasn't a command, it was a death sentence. And Rex couldn't stop it. Not yet. He searched the control room. His limbs moved without permission, eyes scanning for targets. Lips speaking orders he couldn't believe were his. Seal the blast doors. Lock down the ship. Find her. But somewhere beneath the noise, a whisper remained. A single thought clawing through the darkness. You're still in here. Fight. He didn't win in an instant. The chip didn't break from a scream or a heroic gesture. It cracked because of her. Ahsoka didn't run to kill. She ran to understand. She found the droids, found the files, found the hidden truths Fives had died for. She found the answer. And she came back for him. Not to end him. To save him. He remembered her stepping into the medbay, unarmed, surrounded, blasters raised. She didn't flinch. She stunned him. That was mercy. When he woke, it was to the buzz of scanners, cold steel against his back, the sound of a droid whispering coordinates. And her voice, "Rex, I found the chip." She didn't ask if he trusted her. She didn't have to. She saved him. Removed the implant, held his hand when the pain became too much, kept him tethered to who he was, even as the galaxy collapsed around them. When it was over, he lay there, trembling, eyes wide. She stood above him, silent. He whispered the only words that mattered. "I tried to fight it." Ahsoka nodded. "I know." And that was enough. The clones didn't stop. Even when Ahsoka tried to save them, even when Rex shouted their names, even when their shots missed, and their brothers fell, they kept moving. Because they weren't brothers anymore. They were weapons, the same way Rex had been, only hours before. Now, he was the traitor. He ran through the corridors of the cruiser with Ahsoka at his side, not as commander and general, not even as soldier and Jedi. Just two fugitives in a war they had already lost. Every hallway echoed with orders, troopers scanning for targets, droids disabled, escape pods sealed. The ship was no longer theirs. It belonged to the Order. To the voice that spoke through every comm channel, every helmet, every hollow silence that followed the word, execute. Ahsoka didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Rex could see the questions in her face, not about survival, but about him. Was he still Rex? Was he still the man who stood by Anakin, who buried his men with names, who gave everything to protect the 501st? Or had something been taken from him forever? He didn't know how to answer. So he fought beside her. They moved through shadows, avoided detection, reached the control center. Rex used his rank, his voice, his memories of routines and protocols to delay the inevitable. But even then, he hesitated. Because the men hunting them weren't monsters. They were friends, Jesse, Apo, men who had once saved his life. Men who had fought beside Ahsoka and laughed in the mess halls and carried wounded on their backs. Now, they would kill her. Because they didn't know what they were doing. Because they believed they were following orders. And that's what made it worse. If they had turned with malice, it would have been easier to fire back. But they turned with purpose, blind, buried, final. They couldn't be saved. Not all of them. Still, Ahsoka refused to kill. And Rex followed her lead. They stunned when they could, disabled systems, faked movements through security loops. The droids helped. AZI worked without fear. R7 rerouted doors. CH-33P jammed signals. Small acts of rebellion in a ship built for obedience. But time was running out. The cruiser was dropping out of hyperspace. The damage from the confrontation was spreading. One wrong step, and the ship would be their tomb. They reached the hangar. Dozens of troopers stood between them and the shuttle. Ahsoka looked at Rex. No orders, just a question. Can we make it? He didn't answer. He just raised his blaster and walked forward. Not to kill, to distract. He called Jesse by name, tried to reason, tried to cut through the noise in his friend's mind. But Jesse didn't flinch. Under Order 66, you are guilty of treason. Rex lowered his weapon. I know. And in that moment, he meant it. Because if protecting her meant betrayal, then he would betray everything. The ship was falling, engines burning, hulls splitting, the hangar erupting in fire and smoke as the Star Destroyer tore itself apart above an unnamed moon. And still, Rex didn't fire. He could have. He had the shot, the angles, the speed, the training. But as Jesse and the 501st closed in, as the deck shook beneath their feet and the air filled with sparks and screams, Rex held his ground. We're not trying to kill you. His voice cracked over the comms. It didn't matter. The men didn't answer. They didn't have to. Their blasters did the speaking. Rex turned to Ahsoka. Her sabers hummed low. Her eyes weren't full of fear. Just sorrow. Because this wasn't war anymore. This was execution. They dove for the shuttle, blaster fire trailing every step, droids shielding their retreat. The hangar floor gave way as explosions rocked the starboard wing. Ahsoka leapt first. Rex followed. Behind them, the ship collapsed in on itself, a bright, searing light swallowed by the cold shadow of space. The transport hit the atmosphere hard. Rex didn't speak, didn't breathe, just gripped the controls and flew them toward the surface, smoke trailing behind, hearts too heavy to scream. They crashed through trees, slammed into dirt and stone. Silence followed. When Rex opened his eyes, she was still there, alive, and that was all that mattered. They buried the clones. All of them. Every trooper who died aboard that ship, every man who had once called him captain, every helmet painted in blue. He dug the graves with his own hands. One by one. No clones helped him. No soldiers watched. Just droids. Just her. Just memory. Ahsoka placed her sabers in the dirt. She didn't speak. Because there were no words. They had survived, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like failure carried in silence. That night, Rex sat by the wreckage, knees bent, helmet resting beside him. His face looked older in the firelight. Not because of age. Because of guilt. He had lived through something that should have ended him. Escaped a fate that claimed thousands. Broken free from the very programming he was born with. But it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a scar that would never fade. He reached into his chest plate, pulled out a datapad. The names were still there. Hardcase, Jesse, Kix, Tup, Dogma, Apo. And now, one more. Jesse, loyal, steady, trusted, gone. He wrote it slowly, let the letters bleed into the screen like the names themselves were crying. Ahsoka sat beside him, but said nothing. She understood. Because she had lost everything, too. Not just the Jedi. Not just the war. Trust. They had both given their lives to something they believed in, and it had turned on them without mercy. Now they were ghosts, living in the shadow of a war that had already erased their names from the records. When morning came, Ahsoka put on her cloak. Rex didn't ask where she was going. She didn't ask him to follow. They nodded once, and parted. No goodbyes, no promises. Because in that moment, they both knew. They were not meant to be found. He didn't know where he landed. Some nameless moon, scarred and forgotten. No Republic beacons, no star charts, just wind across dry stone, and sky so wide it made you feel smaller than your own shadow. It was perfect, because Rex didn't want to be found. The Clone Wars were over, but it didn't feel like peace. It felt like silence after an explosion, too quiet to trust, too still to believe. He buried his armor first. Not because he was ashamed of it, but because it no longer meant anything. The blue stripes once stood for loyalty, leadership, identity. Now they were a target, a lie, a memory too dangerous to wear. He placed the helmet into the earth like a fallen brother, hands shaking, eyes dry. Then he walked away. There were no goodbyes, no next mission, no commander waiting on the other end of a comm signal. Just space. And a life that didn't know what to do with itself anymore. He tried farming, not because he had any interest in crops, but because the labor filled the hours. Quiet work, simple tools, no battle plans, no voices barking commands through his earpiece. Just the sound of breath, the kind you could finally hear when no one was shouting. Some days he counted stars, mapped the ones he didn't know, labeled them with names he remembered. Hardcase, Kix, Tup, Jesse. Sometimes he lost count. Sometimes he didn't want to remember. The galaxy moved on. News still came second-hand, distorted, filtered through smugglers and traders who didn't recognize him. Jedi hunted, systems tightening, the Empire rising like it had always been there. He kept his hood low, didn't talk much. No one asked questions. And for a time, that was enough. But peace wasn't something Rex understood. Not really. It felt like walking with someone else's shoes. Too big, too quiet, too late. Because the war hadn't left him. It lived in the reflex. The way he scanned doorways before entering. The way he couldn't sleep unless his back was to the wall. The way he still reached for a weapon that wasn't there when something creaked at night. He had survived. But the part of him that had once believed in the Republic, in the Jedi, in the reason they fought, that part had gone quiet. Like a radio left on long after the transmission ended. He didn't know what he was waiting for. A sign. A purpose. Something to tell him he was still more than the ghost of a soldier who had outlived his war. He spent his days in shadows, and his nights wondering what might have happened if the chip had never been removed. If Ahsoka hadn't saved him, if the blaster had fired half a second sooner, he would have killed her. And the guilt of almost doing it was somehow heavier than if he actually had. Because it meant that even now, he wasn't free. He had escaped the Order, survived the Empire's birth. But he was still running. Not from enemies, from himself. He went back for it once. The armor. Months had passed, maybe longer. The moon's days blurred into each other, the kind of place where no one kept time because nothing ever changed. But something in him needed to see it again. He found the spot beneath the ridge, half covered in wind-blown dust, a shallow grave. Not marked, just remembered. He knelt, hands digging through dry soil, until his fingers brushed plastoid. Cold, familiar. He didn't lift it out all the way. Just enough to see the blue. It had faded. Not just from time, but from him. Once, it had meant something. The stripes weren't just for the 501st. They were a symbol of his choice, his command, his place in a war he thought had purpose. Now, it felt like someone else's skin. He remembered painting it. Not on Kamino, on Christopher's. The first time he led a mission under Anakin, the brush had dragged unevenly. Jesse had made a joke about it. Kix had offered to redo it. Rex refused, because it didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be his. Now, it looked like a relic, a monument to a man who didn't exist anymore. He sat with it for hours. Didn't speak. Didn't move. Just stared at the helmet in his hands and wondered how many times it had lied for him. How many times it had hidden his doubt, his grief, the tears he never let his men see, the fear he never admitted to Ahsoka, the guilt that Fives had died for the truth and Rex hadn't stopped it in time. The helmet had never cracked. But he had. He wiped away some of the dust, not all of it, just enough to see the visor. His reflection looked older. Not aged, just worn. Like something once sharpened too many times. He didn't put it on. He thought about it. For a second, he imagined stepping back into it, strapping on the chest plate, tightening the gauntlets, slipping back into the role that had once made him feel whole. But then he remembered what it had made him do. Not just to enemies. To friends. To brothers. To Ahsoka. He placed the helmet back in the hole, covered it carefully, pressed the dirt down with both palms. Not to bury it forever. Just until he was ready. If that day ever came. On the walk back to his shelter, the wind picked up, sharp across the rock, empty space all around him. He didn't look back. Not that day. But the armor stayed with him. Not on his body. In his silence. In the way he stood, still tall, still alert. In the way he fixed broken tools with a precision that belonged to the battlefield. In the way he slept with a loaded blaster within reach, even when there was no one around for miles. He wasn't trying to forget. He was trying to live with it. That was harder. Because some part of him would always be CT-7567. Rex. Captain of the 501st. Friend to Skywalker, shield to Ahsoka. Defender of brothers long gone. But now, he was just a man in the dust, trying to remember who he was when the war wasn't looking. The first time someone called him by name again, he didn't answer. He was in a cantina, far outer rim, the kind of place where no one asked where you came from only if you could pay. He sat alone, hood up, posture quiet. There were 5 other people in the room. No one mattered. No one looked. Until someone passed behind him and said the word, Rex. His breath caught. He didn't move, didn't speak. Because if he looked, and it wasn't real, something inside him might break again. He waited. But the voice didn't return. Just noise, cups clinking, a datapad flickering with static news feeds. He turned his head slightly, enough to catch the speaker in the corner of his eye. Rodian, young, drunk, probably talking to someone else, probably not him. Still, the name echoed. Rex. It used to mean something. Now, it felt more like a ghost story. He had gone by other names since then. Jack, Captain, no one. Whatever worked, whatever made the conversation end faster. People in exile didn't care for real names. Too many names got people killed. But hearing it again, even as an accident, reminded him that somewhere, someone might still know him. And that scared him more than being forgotten. Because if they knew him, they knew what he had done, what he hadn't stopped, what he'd almost become. He left the cantina before the drink was finished, took the long path back to the shelter, didn't look anyone in the eye. That night, he sat outside under the stars and repeated the name under his breath. Rex. It felt wrong. Too loud, even whispered. Because it wasn't just a name. It was everything he had buried. Every decision, every death, every time he stood at the edge of duty and chose something human instead. He remembered Cody, still out there, probably still following the order, probably hunting Jedi without knowing why. He remembered Bly, Gree, Wolf. They were leaders once, like him. Now, who knew? If the name Rex still meant anything, it was only because of what he hadn't done. He hadn't killed her. He hadn't stayed loyal to something broken. He hadn't forgotten Fives. But that didn't make him clean. It just made him a survivor. And survival wasn't something the clones were built for. They were made to fight, made to obey, made to win, and then disappear. No one wrote stories about what came after. Because there wasn't supposed to be an after. The war had ended without them. The Empire didn't need them. And the galaxy would forget them. So Rex kept walking, kept hiding, kept waiting for a reason to stop running from a name that still lived in whispers. Maybe it would come. Maybe it wouldn't. But for now, he stayed in the shadows. Not because he didn't remember who he was. Because he wasn't ready to be him again. The outer rim was wide enough to disappear in. That was the point. Rex drifted from world to world, never staying long enough to leave a mark. He worked where he could, fixing engines, moving cargo, repairing fences for farmers who didn't care about his past. They called him Old Soldier, Drifter, sometimes just Hey You. It was easier that way. No expectations, no questions, no names. He slept in abandoned hunting shacks, in empty transports, under open skies on worlds, where the night was so silent it felt like the galaxy itself was holding its breath. Rex didn't dream often. When he did, it was never peaceful. He saw faces, blue armor, falling ships, Ahsoka running through smoke, Fives bleeding out on cold metal, Jesse aiming a blaster he never wanted to fire. And always, Anakin, not the general he had followed, not the friend he had trusted, just a shadow with a blade of red, walking deeper into a place Rex could never reach. Some mornings, he woke with his hand on the sidearm strapped beneath his coat. Instinct, memory, fear. It took minutes to remind himself the war was over, that no one was coming, that he was alone because he had chosen to be. But hiding wasn't living. It was waiting. And one day, the waiting stopped. It happened on a supply moon outside the Hydean Way. A small, dusty place with a scrapyard that smelled of rust and oil. Rex was hauling engine parts when he sensed it, not danger, not pursuit. Familiarity. Someone was watching him. He pretended not to notice, set the crates down, wiped grease from his hands, acted like any other tired worker, trying to make enough credits to buy a meal. But the gaze didn't leave. He turned. A figure stepped from behind a broken LAAT gunship. Broad shoulders, weathered face, one eye replaced by metal. Wolf A. Behind him, someone even larger. Gregor, smiling like he'd been waiting years for this exact moment. Rex didn't move. Neither did they. Then Wolf spoke. "Thought we lost you, Captain." He almost corrected him, "Not, Captain, not anymore." But the words wouldn't come. Gregor clapped him on the back with a laugh too loud for a man with so many scars. Should have known you'd crawl your way out of the galaxy's worst mess. You always do. Rex tried to answer, tried to smile, tried to say something simple like, "It's good to see you," or "I'm still here," or even just, "brothers." But his throat tightened. Because hearing his name from someone who meant it hurt. It reminded him he wasn't alone in the universe. He just thought he had to be. He nodded once, small, quiet, and the other two understood. They didn't ask questions, didn't mention the war, didn't talk about chips or Jedi or the Empire. They just walked with him. Not behind him, beside him. For the first time since the moon where he buried hundreds of helmets, Rex felt something settle in his chest. Not peace, not forgiveness, just company. A reminder that the war had taken almost everything but not everything. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He wasn't a commander. He wasn't the man who wore blue stripes into battle. He was just Rex. A shadow in the outer rim. But not a shadow alone. And as the three of them left the scrapyard together, the suns dipping behind the horizon, Rex realized something he hadn't let himself believe in years. He could be found, and still survive it. It had been years since he'd heard that name spoken out loud. Captain Rex. He almost didn't answer. The message came through a smuggler's relay, encrypted, distorted, old military codes wrapped in civilian chatter. Most wouldn't have caught it. But Rex had learned long ago to listen for the ghosts that used to follow orders. The voice was clear. Ahsoka. She didn't ask where he was, didn't say how she found him. She just said two words. "We need you." And that was enough. Rex didn't respond right away. He sat with it for a day, maybe longer. Walked the edge of the canyon behind the outpost he called home. Thought about everything he'd buried, the armor, the rank, the war. Thought about Wolf and Gregor, and the fragile peace they'd built in the cracks of a broken galaxy. But some part of him had known this day would come. The Empire hadn't stopped growing. The fear hadn't faded. And whatever the rebels were doing out there, it was going to get worse before it got better. So, he packed lightly. Didn't say goodbye. Just left. The rendezvous was in the outer territories. Cold planet. Sparse terrain. An old Republic outpost no one had touched since the Clone Wars. He arrived at night, cloaked, blaster low, ready for anything. What he found wasn't what he expected. A boy, a Jedi, and a ship that looked like it had survived 10 too many close calls. Ezra, Bridger, Kanan Jarrus, the crew of the Ghost. He didn't know their names then, didn't know their stories. All he saw was a group of strangers too young, too tired, and too reckless to be part of anything resembling an army. But then he saw the look in Kanan's eyes. Distrust. Not fear, not anger. Just memory. Rex understood it immediately. Kanan didn't see a soldier. He saw the man who had killed his master. The armor that had turned on the Jedi. The helmet that never flinched. Rex said nothing. He didn't defend himself, didn't explain the chip, didn't retell the pain that lived beneath every scar. Because he knew it wouldn't matter. Not yet. So he offered help. Not redemption. Just service. They didn't trust him, not fully. But Ahsoka did. And that was enough for them barely. He boarded the Ghost like a passenger, quiet, watchful, eyes scanning every angle. He wasn't looking for threats. He was trying to remember how to be useful again. Not as a commander, Not as a leader, just as a soldier who still had one good fight left in him. And when the engines roared to life, when the stars stretched across the viewport and the ghost leapt into hyperspace, Rex didn't feel like he was returning to war. He felt like he was finally moving forward, even if he didn't know where it would lead. The armor didn't fit the same. Rex had dug it out before boarding the ghost, dust-covered, worn, buried in the same place he'd once sworn never to return. The paint had faded, the blue stripes chipped, but it was still his, still familiar. He held the helmet for a long time before putting it on. It felt heavier than he remembered, not in weight, in memory. He didn't wear it for protection. He wore it because it reminded him of who he used to be. Not a ghost, not a fugitive, a soldier. But this new war, it wasn't the one he knew. There were no battalions, no fleets, no command centers or structured strategies. There were whispers, sabotage, hollow transmissions sent in pieces, small crews doing quiet things that made no headlines but left ripples across the systems that the Empire couldn't always see. The rebels weren't trying to win. They were trying to survive long enough to matter. And Rex wasn't sure if he belonged in this kind of war. On one mission, they sabotaged a weapons factory on Lothal. The team split in half. Sabine and Ezra handled explosives. Kanan and Hera managed the ship. Rex stayed with Zeb, holding the line while the others finished. It should have been routine. But it wasn't. They were spotted early. Stormtroopers descended in waves faster, more aggressive than clones had ever been. Less precise, less skilled, but more ruthless. Rex took cover behind an old speeder engine, fired short bursts, called out flanks, covered Zeb's left. And all the while, his mind kept slipping. He saw Cody's voice in the comms, heard Jesse calling a flank, felt the rhythm of battle the way it used to be. But when he turned, it was just strangers, fighting beside him, trusting him, not knowing the man beneath the helmet had once followed an order that almost ended everything they were now trying to save. After they escaped, Ezra sat beside him in the Ghost's rear bay. They didn't speak for a while. Then Ezra said, "You move like you've done this 1,000 times." Rex nodded, closer to 2,000. Ezra smiled. "That's not something to be ashamed of." Rex didn't smile back. "Sometimes it is." The boy didn't push, just sat with him, a presence without judgment. Later, Sabine offered to repaint his armor something lighter, fresher, more fitting for a rebel. He declined. The blue stayed. Not because of pride, because it reminded him of everyone he carried with him. The men who couldn't be here. The ones whose names no one else remembered. And every time he stepped off the Ghost with that armor on, he honored them. Even if no one understood why. Rex didn't trust Kanan. Not fully. And Kanan didn't trust Rex. Not even a little. It wasn't personal. It was history. They never spoke of it directly, not at first. But it was there, in every conversation that went a little too quiet. In the way Kanan's hand lingered near his lightsaber when Rex gave an order. In the way Rex never turned his back on the man who used to be a boy in a temple, watching his masters fall. They were on opposite sides of the same wound. Rex had followed the command. Kanan had survived it. And nothing could erase that. They worked together because Ahsoka asked them to. Because Hera insisted. Because the rebellion needed every warm body it could get. But working together wasn't the same as trusting. One mission changed that. A distress signal scrambled and weak from a captured cell of rebel sympathizers. Rex and Kanan were closest. No time to wait for backup. They dropped onto a forest moon at night. Trees thick, rain heavier. No lights, no sound, but the storm and the breathing of someone you didn't fully believe in. The camp was worse than expected. Outposts swarming with stormtroopers, no clear path in. Rex suggested infiltration from below. Tunnels. Kanan argued for a high-ground assault. They clashed, quietly, sharply. Two soldiers from two wars, trying to lead one mission. They split up. Rex went low. Kanan went high. The storm got worse. Comms went dead. For 3 hours, Rex moved through mud and steel in silence, no confirmation, no signal. Just the sound of boots and the memory of battles where backup never came. He reached the cell first. Or what was left of it. The prisoners were gone, executed, left in the open as a message. That was when the trap closed. 3 squads, full perimeter, no exit. Rex ran. His legs remembered what his heart tried to forget, how to move through impossible odds like death was behind every corner. He fired until the rifle clicked dry. Then he waited, breath shallow, back to the wall, rain bleeding into the cracks of his armor. And then, light. A lightsaber, blue, cutting through the stormtroopers like flame through canvas. Kanan. He hadn't run. He hadn't abandoned the plan. He had seen the trap before Rex did, and come for him anyway. Afterward, they sat beneath a burned tree as the rain eased. Rex stared at the saber, still humming faintly beside them. Kanan looked at him, really looked. You didn't hesitate back there. Rex shrugged. Didn't have time. Kanan nodded. I keep trying to hate you. Rex said nothing. But I can't, Kanan continued. Because you didn't kill her. It wasn't a question. Rex shook his head. No. Kanan looked away. My master didn't have that luck. Rex lowered his gaze. I'm sorry. The words were small, inadequate. But Kanan didn't flinch. I believe you. For the first time, they sat without tension. Not as Jedi and clone. As survivors. Rex still carried the past. Kanan still saw the scars. But in that moment, they understood each other. And sometimes, that was enough. He didn't expect to care again. Rex had joined the rebellion because of Ahsoka, stayed because of duty, fought because that was all he knew how to do. But caring, that was harder. He told himself not to get attached, not to let their names sink in, not to treat them like brothers. But then he met Ezra. The boy didn't ask about Order 66, didn't ask what it felt like to lose everything. He asked what it meant to fight for something you didn't believe in anymore, and still try to do the right thing. Rex didn't know how to answer. So Ezra asked again, and again, until the silence between them started to feel less like a wall, and more like a shared scar. They trained together, sparred in the cargo bay, talked over ration bars in the back of the Ghost. And slowly, Rex saw it. Hope. Not the kind born from orders or strategy. The kind that lives in the cracks, quiet, persistent, almost impossible to kill. Ezra fought because he wanted to protect people, because he believed it mattered, because he hadn't yet learned how much the galaxy could take from you before it stopped giving anything back. Rex didn't want to break that. He wanted to protect it. And in doing so, something inside him started to rebuild. He found himself standing taller, speaking more, leading again not because of rank, but because the crew looked to him when things fell apart. Sabine trusted his instincts. Zeb respected his experience. Hera listened when he spoke. Even Chopper tolerated him. And in the middle of it all, Kanan the Jedi, who once hated him, now stood beside him without fear. Rex hadn't expected this. Family. Not like the one he had lost. But something new. Something worth defending. The missions kept coming. Harder. Riskier. The Empire closing in from all sides. And every time they returned to base, Rex would walk through the halls with the same question. Is this what Fives died for? Was this the future the clones were sacrificed to create? A rebellion made of scraps and ghosts and second chances. Maybe, and maybe, that was enough. Because it wasn't about winning anymore. Not really. Not in the way the Republic once defined victory. It was about keeping the fire alive. Even when the whole galaxy tried to snuff it out. Rex stood at the viewport one night, watching a convoy of refugees pass overhead, people rescued from an outpost the Empire forgot to silence. Ezra joined him. They wouldn't have made it without you, he said. Rex nodded. They shouldn't have needed me. Ezra tilted his head. But they did. And you were there. Rex looked at the stars, countless, cold, still worth saving. For a long time, he said, I didn't think I had anything left to fight for. Ezra waited. And now? The boy asked. Rex breathed. I do. He didn't think he'd fight again. Not like this. Not in armor. Not in formation. Not as a soldier standing shoulder to shoulder with rebels and commandos, waiting for the signal beneath a sky ready to burn. But Endor didn't ask for permission. It came with urgency, with risk, with a plan built on hope and desperation. And Rex answered. Because the Empire still stood. And he still remembered what it felt like to be free. He came with a small unit, one of the strike teams sent to disable the shield generator. A mix of rebels, scouts, and fighters too young to remember the Clone Wars. They called him Old Man, smiled when they said it. He didn't correct them. He just kept walking. The forest welcomed them like a secret. Tall trees, thick air, light filtering through green like stained glass. It was quiet, too quiet. But Rex had marched through worse. And he knew what quiet usually meant. Danger, waiting, watching. He'd never seen this war from the outside before. The rebellion wasn't like the Republic. It didn't have ranks that mattered, didn't have battalions to fall back on. Everyone moved together. Everyone had something to lose. Even the officers bled when it went wrong. He respected that. Because it reminded him of how the clones used to be, before the chips, before the betrayal. Equal, accountable, united. Rex wasn't there as a commander. He was just a soldier, just a voice in the comms, just hands on a blaster and boots on the ground. And that was enough. Because he hadn't come to lead. He'd come to finish it. The Empire had stolen too much from the galaxy, from the Jedi, from his brothers. And he was done watching it survive. The briefing was simple. Hit the bunker, plant the charges, bring down the shield, so the fleet could strike the Death Star. In and out. Quick. But Rex knew better. No mission ever went quick. So he walked into that forest with his helmet clipped to his belt and his memories heavy on his shoulders. And when the first shot was fired, he didn't hesitate. He dove into the grass, rolled to cover, fired from instinct. His body remembered what the years had tried to forget. The war had found him again, and he met it head-on. The sky turned red before the forest did. Blast of fire cracked through the trees, sharp and fast. The underbrush lit up in flashes of blue and green. Stormtroopers spilled out from hidden trenches, armor bright against the shadows. The ambush came fast. Rex didn't flinch. He was already moving, already firing. The rebels scrambled, ducked for cover, returned fire from behind moss-covered roots and jagged stones. But Rex didn't need orders. He read the battle like a second language. One flanking unit on the ridge, a repeating blaster to the north, 2 troopers falling back to call reinforcements. He adjusted. Not as a general, not as a commander, as a soldier who had seen this rhythm 100 times. He barked directions, not commands. Short, clear. 3 o'clock, shift fire. Get the wounded behind that log. Watch your spacing. And they listened. Because even without stripes on his armor, they felt the weight in his voice. The enemy pressed hard. But the rebels pressed harder. The Ewoks joined soon after, quiet at first, then everywhere at once. Traps sprang from the trees, logs crushed walkers. Spears jabbed from impossible angles. It wasn't clean, but it worked. Rex watched it all from the tree line, rifle hot in his hands, lungs burning. A young trooper ran past him, barely 20, wide-eyed, bleeding from the arm. Rex pulled him down before a bolt struck. "You alive?" The boy nodded, shaking. Rex handed him a thermal. "Then throw this." The kid obeyed. The explosion lit the hill. A cheer rose. But Rex didn't join it. He knew better. Victory was rarely that simple. Minutes later, another wave hit. Stronger. Closer. One of the walkers opened fire into the trees. Flames licked the undergrowth. Smoke rolled through the valley. Birds scattered. Wood cracked. Men screamed. And in the middle of it, Rex kept moving. His joints ached. His knees protested. His breath came rougher now. But he didn't stop. Because if he stopped, someone else died. And after everything, he wasn't about to let that happen again. He spotted the second walker near the ridge. Too far for grenades. Too close for the fighters in back. He ran. Not fast. Not clean. But steady. He scaled the ridge with a blaster in one hand and a detonator in the other. Found a narrow line of sight. Took the shot. Direct hit. The walker groaned, metal bending, legs locking. Then fire. It collapsed sideways, slow, loud, and vanished into the trees below. Silence followed. For a moment. Then cheers. And this time, Rex let himself feel it. Just a little. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't surviving a battle. He was helping end one. Smoke rose through the trees. The forest still burned in patches. But the stormtroopers were gone. The team reassembled. The charges planted. And the bunker? Clear. Hera's voice came over comms. The fleet was moving in. Rex sat against a tree, helmet in his lap, sweat cooling on his skin. The war wasn't over yet. But something was ending. Something big. He watched the sky through the branches and waited for the fire above to begin. The shield fell. From the forest below, it was just a ripple of light, then nothing. But Rex knew what it meant. The fleet would strike, the battle would turn. And the Death Star, The last symbol of everything the Empire used to control the galaxy would fall. He should have felt something. Relief, closure, victory. But all Rex felt was stillness. He stood among the trees, helmet under one arm, watching the smoke drift toward the sky. Around him, soldiers embraced. Some laughed, some cried, some radioed in to command with voices shaking from adrenaline and disbelief. Rex didn't speak, because he didn't know what to say. The last time he had stood on a battlefield like this at the end of a war, it hadn't been the end. It had been a trap, and he had helped spring it. He looked down at the ground. The dirt was black with ash. A stormtrooper helmet rested near a fallen tree, cracked, scorched. He walked to it, picked it up. For a moment, he stared through its visor, and saw himself. The armor was different, the colors changed, but the idea was the same. A soldier, a weapon, a tool, trained to serve a cause that never cared about the man beneath the helmet. He dropped it. It rolled once, then stopped. Rex leaned against the tree, knees stiff, legs sore. The years had caught up to him not just in his body, but in his soul. He wasn't the man who led the 501st anymore. He wasn't anyone's captain. Not really. He'd outlived the Republic, outlived the Jedi, outlived the brothers he used to die beside. What did that make him? He closed his eyes. The forest was quiet now. The battle above still raged, but here, there was peace. And that was what scared him most. Because without a fight, without a mission, without someone to protect, who was he? He heard footsteps. Turning, he saw a young rebel trooper approaching human, barely grown, face smudged with dirt, uniform torn, but smiling. "Sir," the trooper said, uncertain. "You're Captain Rex, right?" Rex opened his mouth to correct him, but stopped. The trooper continued, "I just wanted to say, we wouldn't have made it without you. I mean, you saved half the squad back there, maybe more." Rex didn't answer. Not right away. Then, "What's your name, son?" The boy blinked. "Taran. Private Taran Gold." Rex nodded once. "You did good today, Private." The boy grinned, saluted. Then he was gone. Rex watched him walk back to the others, and realized something. Maybe he didn't need a cause. Maybe the war didn't need to be personal anymore. Maybe it was enough to stand, to show up, to help, because someone still had to. And if he could be that person just for a little while longer, maybe that was what mattered. He sat back down, leaned into the bark, and looked up through the branches. A flicker of light crossed the sky. Then another. Then silence. The Death Star was gone. The Empire, breaking. And Rex, the last soldier of a forgotten army, sat alone in the woods where it ended. Not as a hero. Not as a symbol. Just as a man who refused to stop fighting. Even when everything else told him to. The forest smelled like smoke and damp earth. Endor was quiet after the battle. Too quiet. Rex walked alone through the clearing, past broken trees and scorched ground, searching for something he couldn't name. Not victory. Not glory. Something smaller. Something human. He found it in the helmets. Stormtrooper helmets, rebel helmets, scattered in the undergrowth like bones. He knelt beside one white, cracked through the visor and brushed away the ash clinging to it. The face beneath it was young. Younger than Ezra. Younger than most clones had ever lived to be. For a long moment, Rex didn't move. He wasn't looking at an enemy. He was looking at another soldier who had never been given a chance to choose who he became. He whispered something no one heard. A goodbye that wasn't meant for this boy at all. It was meant for every brother he'd lost. For Hardcase, Tup, Jesse, Echo, Fives. For the men who followed him when they shouldn't have. For the ones he never managed to save. The wind shifted. Branches creaked overhead. The forest breathed around him, alive again. Fires dying, battle fading, life returning to a place that had held death only hours before. Rex stood slowly, knees aching. His age showed now, not in weakness, in weight. The kind that settles into the bones when a man has lived too long without the people who gave his life meaning. He started walking. The celebration could be heard in the distance, faint music, shouts of relief, the clatter of rebel soldiers embracing the first real victory they had ever known. But Rex didn't go toward it. He wasn't ready. He followed a narrow path instead, lined with moss and broken branches, a quiet place, a place untouched by fire. He stopped when he reached a fallen log and sat down, helmet resting beside him. The forest glowed with small lights. Ewoks carrying torches moved through the trees. Their soft voices echoed like a lullaby. Rex watched them, calm settling over him for the first time in years. He remembered something Ahsoka once said. That life is worth fighting for, even when the war tries to take it away. He didn't understand it then. He did now. A shadow approached. It was Ezra. He didn't speak at first, just sat beside Rex, legs folded, hands resting on his knees. "You okay?" the boy asked. Rex didn't answer immediately. Then, "I'm tired." Ezra nodded. "Me too." They sat in silence. Rex looked at the boy, really looked. Ezra was strong now, older, steady, a fighter shaped by loss, but not destroyed by it. He reminded Rex of someone. Not Anakin. Not Kanan. Himself. A younger version. The one who still believed war could mean something. The one who hadn't learned yet that peace was always more fragile than battle. Ezra broke the silence. "You fought for us today." Rex exhaled. "I fought for all of you." Ezra shook his head. "No. You fought like someone who still had something to protect." Rex looked down at the helmet in his hands. "Maybe I did." Ezra smiled, small, gentle. "Then don't stop." Rex closed his eyes. Not in pain. In understanding. Because now he knew the truth. He hadn't fought for the Republic or the Rebellion. Not really. He had fought for people. For names. For memories. For the brothers he lost. For the family he found. For the hope that the next generation wouldn't have to carry the same scars. The forest rustled softly, as if agreeing. Rex breathed in. Slow. Steady. Alive. The war had ended decades ago. Not the Clone War. Not the Rebellion. All of it. And still, Captain Rex remained. He lived quietly now. No uniform, no blaster, no rank. Just a man with a name that once meant something to the galaxy, and still meant everything to the few who remembered. There were no more orders, no more legions, no brothers left to march beside him. Yet every morning, he still rose like a soldier, early, alone. The kind of discipline that never left the bones, even when the armor had long since been discarded. He had outlived almost everyone. The Jedi who once trusted him, the commanders who bled beside him, the republic that trained him, the empire that hunted him. Even the rebellion he briefly served had become history, absorbed into a newer, messier piece. But Rex was still here, still breathing, still watching. He lived near the edge of the outer rim now, far from the core, far from the new republic's politics, and farther still from the cold halls of any imperial remnant. The settlement was small, farmers, traders, families trying to live quiet lives on a world that had seen little war. That's why he stayed. Not because it was peaceful, but because peace didn't feel like a lie here. They didn't know who he was. To them, he was just an old man with old scars, a quiet neighbor, a steady hand when the equipment broke, a pair of eyes that had clearly seen too much. He never told them, not about Kamino, not about Umbara, or annexes, or Order 66. He carried those memories like a second skin, not hidden, just unspoken. But sometimes, at night, when the sky was clear and the stars came out in clusters like forgotten battalions, he would sit outside his home and remember. Not the battles, the brothers. He could still see them. Fives, Echo, Jesse, Hardcase, Dogma, Kix, Cody. Not in armor. In silence. In the spaces between missions. The stolen hours between deployments. The tired laughter. The quiet grief when one didn't come back. He remembered how each one had a voice, a name, a face. They were not numbers. They never were. And he remembered how the galaxy never truly understood that. To most people, the clones were one blur of white armor, mass-produced, programmed, replaceable. But to Rex, every face mattered. Every loss hurt. He sat with those memories now. Not in mourning, he had mourned enough, but in presence, in honor. Because he was the only one left to remember them by name. And he wouldn't forget. He couldn't. Not when so much of who he was had been shaped by the men who stood beside him. Some nights, he'd take out the helmet. His old one. The one painted in blue, the last of the 501st colors. The visor cracked, the paint faded, the inside lined with dust and age. He never wore it anymore. He just held it. And looked through it. Not at the world. At himself. Through that visor, he had watched a galaxy fall. He had aimed at enemies who once were friends. He had obeyed orders he didn't believe in. He had turned against his programming barely and spent the rest of his life living with the knowledge of how close he came to becoming what he feared. The helmet didn't frighten him. It reminded him of who he had been, of who he still was. Because even now, even after everything, he was still a clone trooper. Not in service. In soul. It started with dreams. Not nightmares. Those had come earlier in his life, back when the betrayal was fresh and the grief raw. No, these were different, quieter, slower. He would see them, his brothers, not in battle, but in peace. In the mess hall on Kamino, laughing over identical trays of ration food. In the gunships before a drop, humming tunes to steady their nerves. On Coruscant, walking through the upper levels in civilian disguises, wide-eyed like children pretending to be men. In those dreams, they weren't dying. They were living. And Rex would always wake up feeling both full and hollow. He'd sit on the edge of his bed, listening to the silence. It was a kind of silence you could only know after losing thousands of voices. Not all at once. Piece by piece, name by name. There had been no graves. No flags, just absence. He tried to talk to Ahsoka once, years ago. They met on a quiet moon during the early days of the rebellion. She had changed, older, colder, not in a cruel way, in a surviving way. He understood that. They sat together under a low sky, drinking something warm from tin cups. The kind of moment that would have meant nothing in the Clone Wars, but now felt like a blessing. "I still hear them," he said. Ahsoka didn't ask who. She just nodded. "So do I." And that was enough. Rex had never needed to explain it to her. She had seen it, lived it, escaped it with him. But for everyone else, the story faded. People remembered the Jedi, the betrayal, the Emperor's rise. But the clones, the ones who made the Jedi's deaths possible, were erased, rewritten into the footnotes of history. No one spoke of the ones who fought it, the ones who broke through the control, the ones who tried to resist. No one remembered that Fives died trying to warn them. No one knew that Rex had hesitated for 1 second with a shaking hand on a blaster aimed at the back of a friend. He remembered. All of it. He remembered the screams in the corridors of the Venator-class cruiser as Order 66 unfolded like a nightmare. He remembered Jesse, helmet on, eyes hidden, but voice filled with pain. He remembered what it was like to hold his own brothers at gunpoint. And he remembered what it meant to walk away from that alive. He never felt lucky, only burdened. Because survival, when tied to the loss of so many, didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a weight. And yet, it was a weight he chose to carry. He didn't run from the past. He carried it with him in the lines of his face, the quiet in his voice, the care he took in every choice. He was the echo of thousands. And sometimes, on clear nights, he believed he could still hear them. In the rustling of wind through the trees. In the hum of a passing ship overhead. In the stillness before sleep. Their voices didn't speak words. They didn't need to. They reminded him that he wasn't alone. Not really. As long as he remembered, as long as he lived, they lived too, if only in the shadow of his story. So he spoke their names when no one else would. He whispered them into the sky. And every time he did, something in him stayed whole. Because forgetting them would be the final betrayal. And Captain Rex had never broken a promise to his brothers. The galaxy had moved on. It always did. Empires rose, empires fell, Jedi returned. Sith schemes collapsed and began again. Systems changed flags, senators changed robes. Hope burned bright, and then flickered. But through all of it, Captain Rex remained the same. He wasn't a part of the new galaxy. He was a memory of the one before. In the cities, people spoke of heroes, Skywalker, Organa, Kenobi. Names that carried stories, songs, politics. Statues were built and then ignored. History was curated, taught, softened. But there were no songs for clone troopers. No textbooks wrote of the sacrifice of men grown for war and discarded in silence. The New Republic didn't speak of Kamino. The clones were ghosts. Footnotes in military archives, faces too similar to honor, losses too large to mourn one by one. And so they vanished. Rex watched it happen. From afar, always. He didn't belong in the rebuilt Senate halls. He didn't wear the medals that veterans were given. He didn't go to ceremonies, or parades, or interviews. He stayed in the shadows. Not hiding. Remembering. He could have tried to join the new world. Some suggested it. Rebels he'd fought beside. Commanders who knew his name. They told him he deserved peace, that he'd earned rest. But rest wasn't something you earned. It was something you had to believe in. And Rex wasn't ready. He walked among markets where children played with toy lightsabers, not knowing what the Jedi had truly been. He listened to shopkeepers talk about battles they never fought in, repeating second-hand stories like myths. He smiled when he heard his name once. Two teenagers huddled over a datapad. Captain Rex. He was a clone, fought with Skywalker, I think. I thought he died at Geonosis. No, I think he turned against the Empire. Old rebel. And then they moved on. Just like that. Rex didn't correct them. It wasn't his place. He was just an old man now. Gray beard, deep eyes, quiet steps, no armor, no rank. But inside, he remembered. Not just the pain, not just the loss. The bond, the purpose, the unity of brothers marching in sync. The feel of his DC-17 pistols firing in rhythm. The trust of soldiers who would die for each other without question. The galaxy could forget all of that. But Rex would not. And so he walked. Through cities, through towns, through forgotten outposts and broken battlefields. Sometimes, someone would recognize him. An older rebel, a survivor of Onderon. A pilot from the Endor strike team. They'd nod. Say, Captain. He'd nod back. Say nothing. There was nothing left to say. He wasn't looking for recognition. He was making sure the pieces of the past were still there, not in museums or data archives, but in people, in moments, in places that remembered what war cost. Once, on a distant world, he visited a clone grave. It wasn't official. No marker, no inscription. Just a helmet, half buried, overgrown with vines. He stood before it, hat in hand, heart heavy. He didn't know who it belonged to. It didn't matter. They were all his brothers. And for 1 hour, he stood in silence. Not mourning, not praying, just being. The way they used to, when the mission was over and the gunships hadn't yet arrived. Later, he helped rebuild an old barn for a family nearby. He didn't tell them why he'd come. They didn't ask. But when he left, they gave him a warm meal and a smile. "Come back any time," the woman said. He nodded. "I will." He never did. But he remembered them. Because kindness, too, deserved remembrance. And in a galaxy that forgot so easily, Rex had made it his mission to remember everything. Rex lived long enough to see peace return to the galaxy. Not perfect peace, not lasting peace, but a kind of fragile calm that settled between the stars like dust after a long storm. Worlds healed. Families rebuilt. Children grew up without knowing the sound of marching troopers in the streets. He never took credit for any of it. He rarely spoke of the role he played. Instead, he watched from the edges the way a veteran watches the tide after surviving a shipwreck. Respectful, cautious, grateful, but never fully convinced the waves won't rise again. He stayed on a small world in the outer rim. Simple land, simple days. A place untouched by old wars except for the stories whispered by travelers passing through. That was enough for him. He spent his mornings walking the edge of the fields, the sun warm on his shoulders. His afternoons helping neighbors who needed a steady hand or a sharp eye. His evenings beneath a sky that stretched wider than anything Kamino had prepared him for. Some nights, he felt like the only clone left in the galaxy. Other nights, he wasn't so sure. He heard rumors, from time to time a clone spotted on some trading moon, a soldier with his face helping rebels during the Empire's collapse, a hermit with familiar eyes living in the mountains of a distant world. Rex never sought them out. If they were alive, they had earned their peace. He wouldn't take that from them. But he carried them with him, every brother, every name, every memory that still lived in the quiet spaces of his mind. One day, an off-world researcher came through the settlement, a historian studying the Clone Wars. She recognized the markings on the old helmet sitting on Rex's shelf, faint blue lines, cracked and worn by decades. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Rex studied her carefully. She was young, curious, someone born long after the Republic fell. "It belonged to a soldier," he said. "Was he important?" she asked. Rex smiled softly. "To me." The historian didn't press. She thanked him, left, and continued her work elsewhere. She never knew the truth that she had spoken to the last clone captain of the 501st, the man who had fought beside the Chosen One, the man who had survived a betrayal that took down an entire order of peacekeepers. Rex didn't correct her. Some legacies didn't need to be known. They just needed to be carried. Years passed this way, quiet footsteps, quiet mornings, quiet nights, until the day his joints grew slower, his breath shorter, his hands unsteady from age rather than fear. He sat outside one twilight, watching the horizon burn gold. A young boy from the settlement approached, holding a wooden toy starship. "Are the stories true?" the boy asked. Rex raised an eyebrow. "Which ones?" "The ones about the clones, about how they fought with the Jedi, about how they saved the galaxy." Rex looked out at the fields, his voice soft. "Some of them." The boy sat beside him. "My father says the clones were all the same." Rex shook his head. "No, we were brothers, but we weren't the same." The boy studied him. "Did you know any of them?" Rex's eyes warmed, full of memories that stretched across a lifetime. "I knew all of them." The boy hesitated. "What happened to them?" Rex exhaled. "They did their duty, and they deserved more than what the world gave them." The boy nodded slowly, as if sensing the weight behind the words. Then he ran off, calling for his friends, toy starship in hand. Rex watched him go, a small smile on his face. Because the future didn't belong to soldiers like him anymore. It belonged to children who could grow up without war written into their bones. The sky deepened above him. Stars emerged. Familiar constellations, familiar shapes. He traced them with a finger, whispering names no one else remembered. Fives, Jesse, Hardcase, Echo. He paused at the last one. Cody. Not with anger, not with regret, with love. Rex leaned back in his chair, the cool air brushing his face, the night settling in like an old friend. He didn't feel alone. Not anymore. Because in every star, in every memory, in every quiet breath of a galaxy finally learning to heal, his brothers were still with him. And Rex, the last captain, the last witness, the last soldier of a forgotten army, remained. Not as a ghost, not as a relic, but as a promise kept. A promise to remember. A promise to endure. A promise to live long enough for peace to finally matter. He closed his eyes. The galaxy turned. And Captain Rex rested not in sorrow, not in battle, but in the quiet dignity of a man who survived everything, and still chose to hope.